Hello, welcome to this video. Thanks so much for tuning in, sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. My intention is the highest levels of love, light, unity, consciousness, benevolence for all. Having said that, I just want to give a little energy update, share a little bit of what I've been seeing, feeling, and hearing within my own experience, as well as seeing and feeling into the collective experience. The biggest things that I've been shown is this picture. I may have said this before, but maybe if this is your first time watching this, you've not heard me speak about these things before. I haven't done a video in a while. I had to take a little break. Having said that, I was shown outgoing tide and an incoming tide. And I've talked about this before, and I'm going to talk about movement. I'm talking about patterns and things that have been coming up, the point of no return, and what else? I took some bullet points. Body movement, and the martyr. I may not cover all of those, but this is what I'm going to try to kind of talk about a little bit within this sharing. So I was shown in meditation a visualization of an ingoing and outgoing tides. The outgoing tides are, and I was shown us kind of standing in the middle. So we're standing, feet on the ground, water is all around us. Coming out with the outgoing current is all the crap, right? It's all the sludge. It's brown. It's carrying all of the debris, remnants, and leftovers out to be flushed and moved. Sometimes when that current is coming out, there might be, if you've ever been in the water after a storm or on the water after a storm, there's big things floating in the water. We're going to say large things that might push us off course, like a log or a tree stump, right? That was blown out in a storm. And here we are standing, trying to stay balanced with the incoming tide and the outgoing tide in this white water, frothy current. And we're trying to kind of stay in that flow. And all of a sudden, here comes this log in the debris field, and it just knocks us off of our feet. And we end up going under the current. We get pulled in. And before we know it, we're not sure if we're outgoing, ingoing, where we're standing, and we get sucked into that. And in that process, we get pulled under the weight of the water. We sometimes forget that that outgoing flush or detoxification and clearing is bringing up things for us to see. And we get pulled under with the heaviness of how it can feel while we're processing these emotions, while we're processing these memories, while we're having life reviews about things we could have done differently or things we should be doing differently, or so on and so forth. And I could keep going and going and going because everybody's processing something differently. Also, though, there's an incoming tide. And with that incoming tide is the clean water, all of the downloads and upgrades and lighter frequencies that have come in to help push us and fill us up with energy, we'll say. Both are energy. One has certain elements and another one has certain elements. Neither one is better than the other. And I'll maybe go into that in a little bit more detail. But what I was shown is we get sucked into these energies, and this can go the other direction. We have all of these incoming energies and they feel so magnificent. And then all of a sudden, incoming with this tide comes a bunch of jellyfish, we'll say, and we get stung. And we have these massive downloads where we can get overwhelmed and feel all of these energies, and it's tingly and it's exciting, and we're having these massive ahas, but we're not grounded. Our feet are still not on the ground, and we just go, whee, we roll with the tide, and it takes us wherever. And then we end up somewhere where we're not sure where we are, and we are unable to get back to the place we need to be in order to be, or we feel unable to get back to the place where we're centered and able to stand in a balanced space. So it can work both ways. And for me personally, I oscillate. I get sucked under sometimes. I get knocked over by that big log. And other times these big energies come in and I'm like, whee, see you guys later. I don't know where I am. So part of my life path and lesson in life is to learn how to do this. And then I share it with others from my perspective. So I'm always working through these energies. And so what I was shown is we forget, though, that the water's only this high. So we're way steep. So even though we get sucked under or we get pulled off, we could stand up, back up at any time and get back into, be like seaweed, right? That's still attached to the ground. We're moving with the currents. We're allowing the tides to bring what they may, and we're standing as more of an observer and experiencing it at the same time without getting completely lost in it. I want to just share, though, it's okay to be completely lost in it, because in those cases, sometimes, like in my case, I look back and I go, wait a minute, I got a little lost. Let me come back and bring with me what it was that I saw, felt, or experienced as I was floating around in outer space. Or while I was down deep underneath the ocean, dealing with all of the little, I don't know, we'll call them hanger-oners. And I was able to experience that as well. And not judge ourselves. Oh, I can't believe I let that happen. I can't believe I didn't see that log coming when all I had to do was step out of the way. So the reminder is you're standing in waist deep water. It's like a kid when they get thrown in the pool, they don't realize they can stand up. So we're in that's what I was shown is what we are basically in right now from one perspective. So even though these high energies are coming in and we've raised our frequency and vibration, that also means we see everything else that we may not have been able to see before. So, I could go into so many different directions with that. Having said that, we're really being called to manage our energy the best we can. And that may mean, again, moving. We might see a big log coming now. We recognize that it's here and it's about ready to plow through us. So we counter that by taking a step back. What's happening is some people are being like, no, I can beat that log, right? And they're standing strong and they're like, nope, I got this. And the log comes through and they decide to experience that suffering. This is all obviously metaphor, but they experience that suffering. They get a little black and blue. That log beats them up, but they're still standing and they're like, oh, I got through that. And that may be the way that they're choosing to experience this process. Everybody's different. And that would be an example of someone who's maybe in the space of being more rigid. And ultimately, that's their choice. Would it have been perhaps a little easier and less physically demanding, mentally or emotionally demanding, if they would have just moved back a little bit and let the log go by, and then allowing ourselves to see what that log holds, what it represents? Sometimes people feel they need to suffer, and I take this into the martyr aspect that I'm seeing kind of coming up a lot. They need to suffer in order to learn. No pain, no gain kind of thing. And in the workout world, that's been something that a lot of people have thought that they need to do, break it up, beat it up, and then rebuild. And that works in some cases. But what I'm being shown is we're really being invited to see that we now can see the log coming. What I was shown is maybe back a year ago, we would have been facing the incoming tide and just trying to clean all that stuff off. And then behind us, from something from the past comes back to knock us off of our feet. And we're like, what was that? Where did that come from? I didn't even see that coming. That's still happening to some of us. So when we're in that space, though, we're standing kind of seeing both sides, and we can move away from or towards something that we want to maybe experience in a different way. And what I was kind of shown was the point of no return. And it's funny because my friends Jess and Candace, who I really go into flows a lot with, because they have a way of communicating what they're experiencing in such a beautiful way that I'm able to recognize those patterns within myself, and we mirror off of each other and reflect off of each other quite a bit. My friend Kat and I do that. It's like this beautiful communication that many of us are establishing or have established over years of friendship or years of interacting with other light workers who hold maybe the same pattern, the same frequencies, the same, our soul tribe, right? Our soul groups. That's a different video entirely. But the reason I'm sharing that is she said something really important, Jess. She said, you know, my guys were basically telling me there's no going back. You couldn't go back if you wanted to. Now, for her, that meant one thing. For me, that was a reminder of things I had written about 2 years ago. I called it the point of no return. So we go through these eclipses. We go through, and we're coming up on another one, I believe, November 8th. We go through these astrological alignments. And I always see them as combination locks. I've talked about this for years. Click, click, click. It lines up, it opens a portal, and things go in and things come out. So it's almost like we're just in this giant portal right now where everything's coming in and everything's going out all at once. So we're being really called to make these adjustments accordingly. So if that big log is coming, and let's say that log represents on that outgoing current fear. We've been afraid our whole lives of fill in the blanks, whatever we've been afraid of. Might be failure. It might be success. It might be people will think I'm crazy. Here you go. Boom. It comes through, and we can either fight it or we can see it for what it really is. Instead of experiencing it like the log now comes through and somebody does something to validate our fear. And we feel like everybody around us thinks I'm crazy. And by the way, I've been there, done that. And so now I'm getting beat up by my own fears, and it's being reflected back to me by somebody saying, okay, Carrie, you're crazy. Okay, that's a little too much for me. Okay, you need to go. So that happens. And then all of a sudden, when we come to the point where we accept, all right, you know what? It is what it is. And I'm not triggered by it anymore. Then the log goes through. I got beat up a little bit, but I'm okay. I'm still standing. Other times we go down under the water and we just swim in it. We get carried back and forth and we're like, why is this happening? That happens too. I've got goosebumps as I'm sharing this message, which to me is always a validation. Keep going. You're on the right track. So as we're processing all of this, if we can kind of take a step back and go with the flow a bit, we could still experience or see through our experiences what is being pulled out for us, what these remnants are that are still hanging out in our field to be seen, to be witnessed, observed, and sometimes to be experienced one last time before the final flush, because that log carries something different with us. Let me rephrase that, than it may have last time. So it now looks different than it did last time. We feel different about this interaction with it than we did perhaps the last time we got knocked over, because we're not the same person that we were the last time we were standing in the middle of these currents. So I said I wrote about this 2 years ago. We're coming into these phases where it's like, there's no going backwards. It would take a lot for us to go completely backwards. And that's not where I want to go with this, because most of us don't want to go backwards. Yet at the same time, once you open and you come into that space, it can be very uncomfortable to really see things that we've been in the habit of feeding over the years. And now we're like, whoa, I've been tuning into that for how long? But now I recognize that I don't need to tune into that anymore. I can just step back and acknowledge that aspect of myself, of my partner, of my coworker, And I can see that and all of the gifts that that holds in it for me to see. And now that I am a different person, my interaction with that experience is also different. Therefore, what I choose to do or not do based on that experience also shifts. Therefore, I am literally changing the potentials in my field of my future because of how I'm handling this particular presentation of anger, fear, frustration, lack of self-worth, denial, whatever. Fill in the blanks. We've all got something, right? And some of times that log is thinking that we've already done all the work. And then something comes up and we're like, yeah, but there's this still one thing that maybe if you looked at it, it would actually add to your expansion. It doesn't always mean that we have to heal. We have to go through it constantly. And that's maybe perhaps something I'll get into at a different time. I guess that'll lead me a little bit into the martyr. Sometimes we see this thing coming, whatever it might be. And I'm going to give an example of we see it in somebody else. We can see the log that's about to knock that person over. So we jump over and we stop the log. It beats us up. We take it on, and then the person still gets knocked down by it, right? Or it avoids them entirely and we think, oh, good, now that person's safe. Well, that represents something that maybe they still need to process. So I'm really being called to remind those of us who want to fix everything, who want to solve everybody's problems, who want to jump in and be the hero. It's not necessarily because of ego, although I really am being invited to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Am I doing this so that I can be the hero? Am I doing this so that this person will respect me when they see how much power I have or how much I'm here and available to them? All of these things are part of the log. So sometimes that other person, once we put ourselves into that pathway, it becomes something for us to look at. It becomes ours because then we're being called to look at the situation and go, where does this apply for me? And then there's the recognition, uh-oh, I did that because I really just wanted to be the hero. And then we get sucked under, beat ourselves up, right? Some of those healers out there going, yep, done that before. We beat ourselves up and we're like, oh man, I really shouldn't have jumped in, but I did. And then we wallow and we get pulled in, and then we don't necessarily recognize that that's the gift. That's the opportunity for us to see now, oh, that's a pattern. That's something that I've done over and over again. Or it might be that it's not a pattern and we just misinterpreted the situation. And that's two separate conversations entirely, but we're going to merge the two a little bit. Patterns and misinterpretation. There's oftentimes when we are interpreting our situation, and sometimes we misinterpret. It isn't wrong or right. It just is what it is. And so how we respond to the recognition that we may have misunderstood or misrepresented or misinterpreted something is equally important to the actual instance of us doing the misinterpretation, if that makes sense. So if I see something and I maybe don't quite understand it fully, but I give advice because I'm projecting, which we've all done that, then when we recognize that, do we beat ourselves up and essentially crawl into a hole? Because, so this is where our own recognition of realizing that sometimes that's that person's work. It's not our work. It's our work to just hold space and to be that person in the current, to show other people how to be that person standing in the current. Like, whoa, how did you avoid that big old log that just went through? Oh, here, I'll show you. Not necessarily telling them, step back, move to the right, move to the left. Sometimes they have to figure that out on their own, but we can lead by example, right? And I've done that. I still sometimes want to fix, if I have someone I'm working with and they're ill, I would love to be able to just pull that illness out of them. And in some cases, that's happened. I've had people who had major back issues and then it was gone the next day and never came back. But that is not necessarily, well, first of all, that has a lot to do with what that person is ready for, what they're open for, what they've agreed to, what they're willing to experience. And it also has a lot to do with the healer and what we are allowing to flow through us. And that's, again, another separate topic, but this is all connected. It's all interwoven. And so as we see all of this from who we are now standing in this space, it becomes easier to navigate these waters because we're not swimming around getting sucked in and getting swept away. We're just kind of moving and seeing everything and feeling it as it flows through us. We feel the experience without necessarily having to suffer in the experience. And that is a little bit of non-attachment. We don't necessarily attach ourselves to that log and hang on to it for dear life or fight it. We instead acknowledge, recognize, which is what I always say, and then we integrate or interpret from that perspective. Because when we're in it and we're swimming around on the bottom trying to find our way to the surface, everything that we see when we're down there, we are interpreting from that perspective down there. And again, this isn't a hierarchy thing. Vice versa. We could be up in the aethers, floating around, and we're in this higher heart space, but we're not grounded, and we're not necessarily being, it isn't necessarily applicable for everyone because not everyone's there. But I've seen this and I've probably done it before. Just get into your heart and everything will be fine. That is true. However, it's not necessarily accessible, or it's always accessible, but it may not feel accessible for someone who's down on the bottom trying to figure out which way's up and which way's down. So that's where we are called to share, okay, well, this is how I get into my heart space. We don't necessarily have to suffer with that person or suffer in our own lives in the same way that we may have needed to or felt like we needed to a year ago. Because sometimes the suffering is part of the experience, but sometimes it's just a habit, a pattern of us feeling like we need to suffer. We constantly have to work on this. We constantly have to heal this. Oh, well, I made this mistake, so now I have to go back and really figure things out. Well, when we do that, sometimes it is more of resistance than it is just allowing things to move through us. And that leads me to, it's sometimes just a pattern. And what I was shown is, and I don't know if I ever finished the conversation about my friend Jess, but she said there's, oh yeah, the no going back. And I was saying it's the point of no return. So I play with words. When I wrote that out, it was a point in time, a directional perspective, a node of no, K-N-O-W, return. So doing it again, turning. So it's like it's like not turning and looking back, so we get knocked off of our feet. That's not going to happen for some of us because it can't. Because we've come to a particular placement, field, space, vibration, that no longer is something that would turn our heads. We don't even, it's no longer relevant. So we don't need to go back to it. It's a different point in space. It's a different recognition in the knowingness of the now. So we now know, therefore, we couldn't go back because it's not a place of, we're only moving into expansion. at that is what I'm kind of trying to get at. And I could go into so many different layers there. So recognizing that, and that can feel, make us feel slightly off kilter sometimes, slightly off balance, because we're not necessarily, again, I go back to habits and patterns. If I'm doing something that I'm used to doing, I'm not the same person. So why am I doing this again? Well, it may not be the same pattern. It may not be the same habit. It might be something that's shifted slightly. And now I recognize it. Therefore, it's not the same pattern. It's changed the geometry. It's changed the frequency. And therefore, our interaction with it changes as well. I want to get into habits a little bit because I always come back to Pavlov's dogs. Now, there are certain things that we have trained ourselves to be in the habit of doing. And whenever I say habit, I always see a habit as something a horseback rider wears. So I see our clothing. We're used to putting on a particular outfit. That is our habit. And we are used to that representing who we are. But now that's just a habit. And once we do something, I brought up movement, I believe. I've done a couple videos and it's taken a few takes. So when we are recognizing that our habit, for example, I said something the other day and I went, I don't know if that's true, actually. It was a habit, saying 100%. I've said this before, 100%. Is it really 100%? Or am I just in the habit of saying that? Sometimes I agree with something 100%. Sometimes I say that and I'm like, oh, no, I think it's closer to 90. There's about 10% that I don't agree with there, But it's us recognizing that. And all of a sudden, when we do that, we stop that pattern. So we don't fall back into the same habit because now we've changed the pattern or the recognition and the interaction with that particular habit. So we then no longer do it in the same way that we used to. We make adjustments to it. And I was also shown like grooves in the brain. So it's like we're rewiring our consciousness, even though that isn't the exact definition. But if you think about it, we are, instead of always thinking, if we open ourselves to feel, but we're still always thinking, we're still changing our patterns because now we're adding to it the feeling. It gives it more depth. It gives it more layers. And then we then become more connected in a different way, which creates a different pattern. And in that moment, we are not the same person we were an hour before we did that. So it can feel wonky because I've made the comparison that if you go get an adjustment, or if you go to the chiropractor, or if you have body work done, or let's say you do cranial sacral, whatever it might be, sometimes even energy work. I've had people where I do energy work with them and they feel weird. I feel like I'm not in my body. I always tell them, go ground, go stick your feet in the grass, get in some water. This will pass because we go into a place of expansion. We clear out distortions or the blanket that sometimes we've been wearing. And all of a sudden that gets lifted and we feel more vulnerable. We feel out of sorts because that energy is then, we're still in the process of making the adjustments in order to now, it's like the light body connecting with the physical, right? There's adjustment periods. I mean, it's always connected with physical, but let's say it becomes a stronger connection. We're not necessarily used to that. We're not in the habit of interacting with some of these energies. So we just do what we're used to doing. But many of us are finding that that doesn't work anymore. And that's beautiful. But then it becomes, well, what does work? This doesn't feel right anymore because you're not the same person. Therefore, those habits need to adjust or clear out entirely. And then we create new grooves in the brain. We create new patterns that then allow us to bring in that incoming tide, that allow us to make the adjustments in order to fit in our bigger representation, fill the bigger shoes, fill our habits, our riding clothes, so that we can ride the waves and move with the adjustments that are being offered. And it becomes more of a conscious interaction with our experiences, with one another, with the energies that are all around us. So I think I kind of touched on a lot there. So that's my little energy update. I will share more at another time. In love and light, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. And I really appreciate everyone who watches these videos. Thank you for sharing them. Thank you for your comments. I'm sorry I don't always get back to the comments. Sometimes I get to them a year later. I am very, very busy, as all of you are, or most of you are. And so one of the things, I'll end on this note, you know, part of one more message is these expectations. That was another message that came through, is kind of letting go of expectations, which sometimes is a habit. Not expecting. So, okay, I am being called to touch on this briefly. For example, I sometimes beat myself up, not literally, but, oh, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or I need to do more of this. And in reality, that is only because of the expectations I've put on myself based on what expectations others have put on me. And I'm essentially feeding back into that space. And I've really been called to let go of all of that. And we are not the same people that we were. Yet there are people around us who will expect us to be a certain way. And we don't show up as that, and then they're disappointed. That's on them. And this can be anything. It can be the way that you look. It can be the way that you talk. It can be who you're interacting with. Oh, I didn't know you were friends with that person. I'm disappointed. Really? Who do you think I am? Right? So this is, we're being called to recognize, who do we think, logically, analytically, left brain, that we are. Nobody is everything that we think they are. They are their own individual, unique expression. And so we're really being called to look at what we're expecting from people and what we're not expecting. The more we can just let go of all of that, we recognize that really sometimes those expectations that we put in others also are a direct reflection of the expectations we're putting on ourselves, to behave a certain way, to interact a certain way, to dress a certain way, all of it. I've really been called to let those go, not only on what I expect from others, but also myself. And this, we can play with this. Some people will go, well, you have to have expectations. I expect good things. Well, that's fine. That's a very broad term. I expect good things too, but I also don't expect them. And then if they don't happen, I end up in a space of complete disappointment. That's something we're really being called to recognize, because that expectation is that log. To go back to the message. And that log holds all these gifts. Well, why did you expect it? What is it about that you feel let down about? Because I've done this before with friends. I've done this before with all kinds of things, you know, the political arena. I expected this to happen and it didn't. And I was really let down, whatever that might be. I was expecting this promotion and I didn't get it. Well, why? What? Really analyzing it, just taking a step back. Sometimes when things happen in our lives that let us down, for example, that's on us. Other times it gives us the opportunity to find our own power. And sometimes when these things happen, it pushes us in a direction where we can say, I realize, and I'm using like a promotion, for example, I realize maybe it's time for me to leave and move on somewhere else. At the time, that can be very difficult. And that might be the experience that we needed to have in order to push us in a different direction. That doesn't mean we don't go through the feelings of disappointment. We're human, you know? If I have someone that treats me poorly and I expected them to be my friend, of course I'm going to be disappointed. Of course I'm going to feel let down. But then once I work through that, I can also recognize that there may be something going on in their lives that I don't know about, right? That I don't fully understand. And maybe they don't fully understand it either. And that's why they reacted the way that they did. And so it is this being in flow. And this can be challenging as a human, or a being having a human experience, we could say. So again, that's something else that came through that I really wanted to share. So I really have had to let go of these boundaries that I put myself in, realizing that I can't make everybody happy, and that's okay. And why is that necessary? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be in our, what's the right word here? Sovereignty isn't the right word, but we still want to operate from our ethics, right? Or morality. And we still have that human decency, right? These are things, thou shalt not, right? The common moral code of being a good person. But again, the idea of what we have, what that looks like on somebody else, may not be what that person thinks is a good person. And that's a whole other video, right? So the biggest thing is right now, focus on us. And by us just being who we are, it allows us to be in a place of presence with everything that's going in and everything that's coming out. And we may not always be standing. We might get sucked under, we might float away, but that's part of the experience sometimes too. And letting go of the expectation of what that needs to look like, of what a spiritual teacher should be doing, shouldn't be doing, right? Letting go of that to a certain extent so that we can just be who we are and not label ourselves or put us in a category, which is another video entirely. So I just wanted to touch briefly on that and just kind of end on that note. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful for everyone. And I really do recognize that many people, you guys, are in it right now. They're going through a lot of stuff. And there are people who are saying things that they don't mean, or saying things that they mean at the time, and then having that later on, that regret of going, oh, I can't believe I said that. And we're all processing in our own way. We all have anger that comes up. We all have feelings of expectations. We all have these. But the more we can just allow ourselves to just be, the more we can allow others to be themselves. And it becomes a natural code of operating from our highest potential, instead of us trying to fit in someone else's shoes, fill in someone else's shoes. We just walk in our own power, our own sovereignty, our own space of love. And when we do that, everything else goes a little bit smoother most of the time, right? So in love and light, guys, thank you so much. Namaste.